the free market, the natural state of a free market is deflation. That's what should happen in a free market. So anything that stops that, any policies that stop that to try to drive inflation, thereby steal that productivity and transfer them to other people unnaturally. It's a theft. And so the bigger theme here is people are starting to realize all over the world how great that theft is and the impact.
Javier Milei, who has been an avid proponent of dollarizing the Argentine economy, has just won the presidential election in Argentina. His victory has significance not only for Argentina, but could also have ramifications for Bitcoin, given his pro-Bitcoin stance. And in fact, news of his victory over the weekend immediately sent the price of Bitcoin higher. So who is Javier Milei? According to this summary from Ground News, Milei has gained significant support in Argentina by advocating for drastic measures to curb high inflation, including replacing the local currency with the US dollar and eliminating the central bank. Milei is also known for his libertarian and conservative views, opposing feminist policies, abortion, and the idea that humans contribute to climate change. He has drawn comparisons to former US President Donald Trump. Ground News has been my go-to news source because of how easily I can access multiple news articles and perspectives on any one story, which is why I'm excited to have them as a continued sponsor. Ground News is an app and website that aggregates articles from various sources all around the world, with the end result being an easy-to-use aggregator platform that gives me access to reliable information I need about a story in one place without having me to cross-reference with different articles from Google. With my Vantage plan, I can see in their newsroom section that there are over 40 sources covering the story, with the majority of coverage coming from the left. Out of all these sources, 80% are high factuality, but 8% are low, meaning there's a mix of sensationalized headlines in the mix. You can read deeper into the articles here. These left sources, such as NBC LA and Huffington Post, highlight Javier is the lion, the Whig, and the warrior, whereas sources from the right, like let's say from Russia Today and Frankfurter, states that he is an outsider and went from TV clown to president. If you subscribe to the Vantage plan, you'll get 40% off unlimited access during their biggest sale of the year by going to ground.news/David Lin with a link in my description down below. Our next guest is Jeff Booth, general partner at Ego Death Capital and the author of The Price of Tomorrow. We'll be talking about Bitcoin, the current situation with the U.S. economy, and how to invest in today's very turbulent environment. Jeff, welcome to the show. Pleasure speaking with you today.
You too, David. Thanks for having me.
Let's start by talking about the election in Argentina. Now, it doesn't affect most of us here in North America unless we're Argentinian. But what's interesting is the president-elect Javier Milei is not just a proponent of dollarization, but also a proponent of what many believe would be Austrian economics, as well as the libertarianism and Bitcoin. So his ideas, his monetary beliefs are very much aligned with many Bitcoiners. And indeed, like I mentioned, he is a vocal advocate of Bitcoin. How do you expect cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in particular to change in Latin America following Milei's victory?
Well, I think it's better to look at the broader context of what's happening around the world. And what's happening around the world is governments are being forced to inflate their currencies at a higher and higher rate, which is essentially stealing the productivity gains that should flow to society in the form of lower prices. And it's transferring up to the state to be able to solve a problem that the free market is meant to design. So what it means all over the world is the free market, the natural state of a free market is deflation. That's what should happen in a free market. So anything that stops that, any policies that stop that to try to drive inflation, thereby steal that productivity and transfer them to other people unnaturally. It's a theft. And so the bigger theme here is people are starting to realize all over the world how great that theft is and the impact. And politicians that are starting to talk about that theft, and because there's a whole bunch of single issue voters arising because they're starting to understand that the window is opening to that theft and what it means to them. are starting to vote for those politicians all over the world. And so ultimately, this is good. It doesn't matter when Javier Milei moves to Bitcoin totally, but eventually it's going to drive this all over the world. And more people are going to open their eyes to say what should have been theirs all the time.
But do you think it's a replacement for central banks?
So it completely transitions the system, and this is super important to understand for many people that maybe listen to your show. They won't know. The prices fall to the marginal cost of production in a free market. We have exponentially rising productivity, and that means measured in a currency that cannot be manipulated, then prices are falling exponentially forever. And as long as Bitcoin stays decentralized and secure, which I believe is inevitable, but you could argue that, but that's the only argument. If it stays decentralized and secure, it is repricing the entire world. It is imposing that market discipline on the entire world. What most people are doing is pricing Bitcoin from the fiat instrument that it is debasing. So in their world, their prices are going up, and they're making trades within a system that is being repriced from a new system, thinking they're safe within that system, and they're not. They're losing. So all prices relative to Bitcoin, and you can measure exactly what I'm saying, are falling. House prices falling. Your energy prices are falling. Everything measured in Bitcoin is falling, as the free market would suggest it would.
Is there a particular reason as to why Bitcoin has, over the last 13 years, outcompeted other financial assets in terms of just nominal percentage growth?
Because you're measuring that percentage growth in the fiat instrument. It doesn't care. It's imposing a market discipline tied to energy and decentralized 21 million units that can't be compromised. And it's tied to energy, decentralized and more decentralized and secure every year. So everything measured in that is falling in price. Everything measured in your existing fiat currency is rising in price.
When Satoshi wrote the white paper, he originally proposed Bitcoin to be a peer-to-peer medium of exchange, a form of digital cash, if you will. At what point do you think it transformed from not just a medium of exchange to more of a store of value and perhaps an instrument to beat inflation, like you just talked about?
So the store of value is first. So Satoshi did write about the medium of exchange, but the store of value is first. And I would say that that's still a huge confusion in the market. I wrote a piece a year ago that explained what was happening at a first principles level, that effectively Bitcoin was the only thing that was decentralized and secure, and it was ossifying at its base. So the harder and harder it got to change, it ossified, and it created it, instead of what most people are looking at a coin or something, it's creating essentially a new peer-to-peer internet that hardens at its base, that can't be changed. Once that bedrock is solid, then new layers get built on top of that bedrock, and layers like Lightning or Fediment that provide more and more ability to build different applications, peer-to-peer money, say, on top of that layer. But the first thing is the decentralized and security that can't be. Maybe here's a different way of looking at it. Human history, long history of human history, shows a fundamental flaw in money, in that if money could be concentrated to steal the productivity that should flow to society, then it will be concentrated, not it might be. So that's what happens to gold over and over. It gets concentrated, and then and instead of allowing the free market to work, the rules change. So the question of Bitcoin and what people should look at is that possible to change the rules in Bitcoin, and why not? Why or why not? If it's very hard to change, like I said on that layer one, then it provides a different course for the future than their history books would imagine. And that's the big change that people are grappling with right now. So they can't see, they effectively are pricing Bitcoin from the wrong system.
As soon as Milei won the elections, or when the results came in, the Bitcoin price jumped 3%. I want to read you a quote from one of his speeches. He says, "We have to understand that the central bank is a scam. What Bitcoin is representing is the return of money to its original creator, the private sector." Can you unpack that for us? Do you share that sentiment? There's two parts
Yeah.
to
So
the argument.
so
Yeah.
so all money is information. It connects us. So you don't want more money. You want more of what the carrying capacity of that money is, what you believe that your part of the ledger owns, and what you think you need to create what you want. So it makes perfect sense that if money is information and you manipulate money, manipulate information, that everybody would be measuring through that manipulation or that information. So you'd have a whole world measuring the system by the very system that's driving the problem. And all Bitcoin is an honest ledger. In fact, you could argue, why are people so up in arms about something that's just an honest ledger? And it's imposing that market discipline and the result of the market discipline is prices fall to the marginal cost of production. The free market wins. And so you could yell at it, you could hate it, but every block, every 10 minutes, it keeps on doing that. And you cannot negotiate with that. It's imposing market-based discipline on the world. And people who choose not to agree with that, they don't have to agree with it, but it's repricing them anyways.
Should a nation state be involved in the adoption of Bitcoin, though? I'll read you a paragraph from a CoinDesk article that came out 5 days ago. It says, in November 2022, El Salvador President Nayib Bukele announced a dollar cost averaging plan promised to buy 1 Bitcoin every day. At the time, the country, based on public statements from Bukele, was already the owner of 2,381 Bitcoins purchased at an average price of roughly $44,000. The price then was just $19,000, putting the country at a $60 million loss on its holdings. The counter argument to holding Bitcoins in its treasuries is, of course, what's happening right now to El Salvador, the loss in nominal terms, fiat currency terms. So how would you respond to the argument that countries should not be adopting Bitcoin right now is either a form of legal tender or as a treasury holding precisely because of its volatility?
I would argue that all these media articles that you're looking at are designed from the state that controls money today. And so if you think about what would a system based on theft and money say about a system that wasn't based on theft and money, and then you argue the actual merit. So last week, when El Salvador bonds were rated upgraded, same week US was downgraded, the exact same week. And then if you look at the growth in their economy, the growth rate of the GDP and tourism and what's happening in El Salvador, even if, and by the way, that article you just read is older. So now if they looked at that, they're in a positive space in their Bitcoin. But if you looked at what that drove to their economy, it would be impossible to say the El Salvador experiment isn't a fantastic success. And it's going to be copied by other nations all over the world. That's what Milei is doing.
Javier Milei has proposed to dollarize the economy, which is to say that the peso will more or less be abandoned, and instead they will use the dollar as their official currency. Other countries have already adopted this model, of course. Hypothetically, could the same model be applied to Bitcoin, meaning that instead of using a peso or a dollar, everyone just uses Bitcoin? Is that possible right now?
It'll take some time before that happens, but that will happen. And effectively, what every single person can do. So here's a better way to say this: there's over $400 trillion of global debt. That debt is already insolvent. To pay that debt, $1 a second would take 12,873,000 years. The only way to make it solvent is through financial repression. In other words, higher inflation. And you know that, and I know that, and most people know that. Yet they stay stuck in a system or trading units in a system, house prices or whatever in a system that they know has to be gamed through financial repression. Instead of moving over to a new system that is repricing that system. So every single human being on this planet has a chance to front run their governments, front run BlackRock, front run because you have an open network that's imposing this discipline, and every single person will have that choice whether or stay stuck in an existing system. And if I stay stuck in an existing system, whether I'm on the dollar or peso, it's just the rate of theft that's happening to me. The rate of inflation, you could just say, is a rate of theft of your purchasing power.
The rate at which Bitcoin has been adopted over the course of its 13 years so far has been remarkable, but there's still billions of people on the planet who have not yet used Bitcoin or any form of cryptocurrency whatsoever. What's going to have to come first? An increase in the price of Bitcoin or higher rates of adoption to drive higher prices? Is this a chicken and an egg problem, Jeff?
No, so again, when you say the increase in price of Bitcoin, you're naturally thinking as a trader from your fiat currency. In fact, you're doing exactly what kind of most people would do, because they're pricing in a fiat instrument that is stealing your money to price one that isn't. Why it's so important to understand what's happening, because it's outside the system. It's the only thing without counterparty risk to the system. It is repricing everything else, and it can reprice it through deflation or inflation, but it is repricing the entire world because it's imposing that market discipline. And so what would happen on a system like that, if you ask that same question? By the way, I created a bunch of businesses early on in the technology in the 90s, and as the internet was taking shape. And if you asked this same question that you just asked when the internet was moving, people would have been in the other system and said, no way these companies will win. The internet is a joke today. Remember what it looked like in 1998, 1997, and you couldn't download anything, let alone a movie. And so Google wasn't invented at that time. And so if you realize the rate of growth at the end of Bitcoin right now is exactly the same rate of growth as the internet, but we're in 1996, you can see what's going to come. And so that's what, so if you understand this at a first principles level, and you understand what all of the innovation and the entrepreneurs building on top of it, in fact, that's what we're doing at Ego Death Capital. We're investing on all of the layers on top of this, and the entrepreneurs that are creating incredible value that people don't yet see, that is going to emerge and bring on billions of people.
So what is Bitcoin for you fundamentally? Is it a technology? Is it a commodity? Or is it an investable asset?
It's a new peer-to-peer internet backed by energy.
So what do you mean by energy? What kind of energy are we talking about?
So Bitcoin mining chases abundant energy. It provides an economic rationale to chase abundant and unused energy around the world instead of centralizing energy. So it's a better decision proxy for energy. And that's what, because in Bitcoin mining, you can't make money unless you're the cheapest energy provider. And so that way it chases all around the world low cost energy. And so by doing so, and then the nodes that keep the Bitcoin miners honest, it provides a free market incentive for driving energy abundance, and that secures the new peer-to-peer internet. So you don't have the peer-to-peer internet that lives on top of a system designed to make prices go higher by manipulating money. Make energy prices go higher too by manipulating money.
I'm just trying to understand your rationale here. We need to consume energy in order to mine Bitcoin. How does Bitcoin provide energy?
Because it chases. So I'll give you an example in BC, right, where I am.
Yeah.
So when the site CDM is coming online, the energy prices would go negative because there's too much energy. So what they did is they turned off, to centralize the energy and provide the capital cost to be able to build the site CDM. They turned off all the secondary providers, all the private providers of energy. It wasn't an energy problem. It was a distribution problem because energy prices would go negative. So it was a capital problem. And in this way, this chases abundant energy. It provides a mechanism for those energy companies to turn that energy into profits. I'm going to Africa in a couple of weeks, and the same thing is happening in Gridless in Africa. And the excess energy that these companies are essentially creating Bitcoin for free energy, they're powering villages that would have never been powered under a centralized controlled money. So it's spreading out, and that decentralizes the network faster through the free market. You're making economical decisions for energy.
You mentioned several times that fiat is theft for your wealth. Would you say the same thing about a fiat currency in a low inflationary country, like let's say Japan, for example, where hypothetically if the country had no inflation and the inflation rate were near zero, would it still be theft?
You're measuring off zero. So think about where technology is going. The exponential function of technology means you should have exponentially increasing productivity. That exponentially increasing productivity means prices should fall exponentially. It means you should have to work less because technology is doing more of the work. Yet we live in a different system that's taking that money to try to redistribute it to others and holding prices high, because otherwise the entire 400 trillion would be insolvent tomorrow. Because if you allow deflation from the existing system, you couldn't. So what Bitcoin is a transitionary system that is allowing a transition from one system that cannot, it's incongruent with technology. It can't let the prices fall to one that can. And that's what's that's what the change is. So anything, to answer your question specifically, yes, if the actual rate in the free market was 5%, that your money should be increasing in value by 5% because productivity was growing that fast. So you'd have negative 5% GDP because productivity was moving so fast, and you had zero inflation. Yes, you're stealing 5% of the purchasing power of the population.
In North America, in the US in particular, the average increase in productivity year over year over the last 40, 50 years has been on average 1 to 2%. Let's loop AI into this conversation. With the advent of AI and more advanced technologies, can we expect productivity to significantly change?
David, once again, you're caught by measuring productivity through a system that look at the debt rise in the same system that you were talking about. So that when I wrote in the book, I wrote in the last 20 years, you had $185 trillion of additional debt for $46 trillion of growth globally. So your productivity measure is through that lens with all of that misallocation of debt for output. What's actually happening, if you just look around, look at what we're using right now, look at the phone you use. If you think the productivity is only 1-2%, you're insane. It's way more than that. You're looking through the debt-based system that's measuring everything. You're measuring the system from the system. So the productivity is actually way higher, but we're masking that productivity by rolling up more and more debt and more obligations that we can't pay back and manipulating money to do so. And everybody's measuring the productivity through that same system that's stealing it. Okay. That's actually why it's so hard to see. A system problem can't be measured from the system creating the problem.
Well, I think the private sector can't erase public debt, at least not overnight. So how can the public sector, well, how can the private sector, specifically the private sector, increase productivity with the use of technology?
Move to Bitcoin. It's pricing everything. It's pricing the pricing falling. So in a lot, if you look at every single price in my world, because my denominator, my unit of measure is Bitcoin, everything is falling. Energy prices are falling. My house prices are falling. Everything is falling relative to Bitcoin, as it should in the free market. And it will continue forever. If you want to measure productivity through the existing system, which is essentially creating more units of money unnaturally, then you won't see the productivity gain. It'll be stolen from you.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So let's just walk through this. So let's say I am a private business. Let's say I accept Bitcoins as a medium of exchange, or I adopt Bitcoin or put it on my books to hold it. How can that process help me increase the productivity of my business and my workforce?
So holding it only allows you to measure in an instrument that doesn't steal from you. So it doesn't allow you to gain productivity in your business.
Yeah.
But if you started, I'll use an example. One of our portfolio companies, Breeze, to builds an SDK on non-custodial wallets. And so on that SDK on a non-custodial wallet, what that means is businesses can take Bitcoin and get paid in Bitcoin and hold their own keys, not transfer them to somebody else. So it's their own coins, and share in the fee generation from that. So instead of paying Visa 2.5% to 5% to be able to take customers' money, they gain the 2.5% to 5%, plus they share in the profits of some of the transaction fees of that. So that's a massive productivity gain for businesses that decide to do this. And same thing on users. As more businesses understand how much is being extracted from them from some of these centralized services, and they move to users to be able to say, why don't we reduce prices and create more business? It's a massive productivity gain that flows to them. That's just an example, but there's hundreds more coming.
Okay. I want to turn to some news in the AI and tech sectors. You've been involved in the tech sector for many, many years. You've served in executive positions on a number of in a number of different places. OpenAI board fired Sam Altman, and now he's being invited back. And then Sam said that he wants a change in the board before anything is confirmed. It's been reported that Altman was not consistently candid in his communications. Was from a memo from the OpenAI board. What do you think is going on right now?
Yeah, I think you had I can't comment on what's happened, but I would say that at a high level, what you'd have is this: 500 people have already signed, 500 out of 750 signed that they're going wherever Sam's going. So you just had one of the preeminent AI companies in the world. Effectively, they're going to move to, I would say Sam's going to move to Microsoft, and a whole bunch of those people are going to move with them. Can you imagine the anxiety in the boardrooms of Google, Nvidia, Facebook, on Apple, on what just happened? You have artificial general intelligence coming, and and the board just created an environment where you've just given that complete advantage to Microsoft.
Yeah, that's a good point. Microsoft currently, right.
Yeah.
So
And so now, but play that forward in it, because it's tied into the same theme. These are not disconnected themes.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about artificial general intelligence, or even narrow artificial intelligence today, in narrow, it can do, in some industries, it can do better than most humans. And it's picking off industry after industry after industry where it can do that better. As that gets tied into robotics, it moves it at a faster rate as well. It can do not just the digital industries, but it can do the physical ones as well. And all of those prices fall to the marginal cost of production as well. I have a friend with a good friend with a robotics company that he thinks within 4 years he will be able to provide general labor for $5 an hour. So but that general labor won't be just general labor. It'll be smarter than all of you and me and everything combined. So what would the business hire? Who in their right mind would hire us when they could hire that would be smarter than us? And so you could see the trend of what technology does. And that trend, that AI trend, is not different. If you allow prices to fall, then AI serves us. If you allow prices to rise, if you make prices rise, then the people who control the AI control us. And so Bitcoin is that free market force that is forcing that productivity into our hands.
Do you foresee a major change in wages as well? Suppose you are a McDonald's franchise, for example, and you're operating in a state that has just increased minimum wages, and now you have the option of fully automating your restaurant so that your fixed costs of using of robots is lower than hiring people because the minimum wage just increased. So you're not going to hire people anymore. The unemployment rate of that particular sector just went up. So
So that's what I'm going at. And measured through the
yeah,
system, you would see lack of productivity when
yeah,
you can see perfect productivity happening. And I'll take it one further, and this is important because many of your listeners, I would suspect, just like many politicians and everybody else, are measuring the system from the system. They're trying to increase jobs at the rate of this, and they're making the entire thing worse. And so, what would you do today if you look at the Magnificent Seven? Why are the S&P gains without them would be negligible, right? With them, it's the only thing that's growing. Why is it growing? Is because they control the artificial intelligence. Who do you think's driving regulation to control artificial intelligence? Those same companies, because they're trying to capture those gains. Where do you put your money? You're trying to put your money to save your money to outrun inflation in those companies that are also losing money to Bitcoin. That's what's happening. So everybody's making it worse. And why you make it worse is you wouldn't use those companies unless they provided you more value. If it was way more costly, they wouldn't. So the very thing that makes them valuable is the removal of labor to attract you to use their companies.
yes. You mentioned artificial general intelligence, AGI. When can you expect to see AGI adopted en masse or rolled out?
We're pretty early still in that. I say we're pretty early, but some of the hints from OpenAI and behind the scenes suggest maybe there's an insight that we're closer than we think. The when I predicted in my book, I predicted, I think, 2030 in my book. But when you realize that what artificial intelligence is, that kind of general category of what machine learning, what we're looking at, it's just been on an exponential trend for about 70 years. But now we're into thick steps of the exponential. The doubling rate is the same rate, but it's measured logarithmically. It means in the next 18 months, what we can expect to see, if it's shattering what your belief structure is today, wait till tomorrow, wait till 18 months from now. You will not believe what it will do. That same thing applies to robots and such too. We can't move, our minds can't keep up with how fast this is moving.
Can you envision a future for us? It's both exciting and scary at the same time. For the first time in human history, presumably, we have something, not someone, but something that could challenge our intelligence. How do you feel about the future?
So on Bitcoin, I feel positive. I actually think that this is, in fact, the reason I wrote my book 4 years ago was this trend, right? To be able to understand what was going to happen as humans created the technology to be able to move our brains, what we think of, into machines. You would think that naturally that would make prices fall as we got more productive, that we could do more, we could spend more time, we could, instead of being on this mouse wheel chasing within the system designed to get ever further higher prices against us. When we develop technology, the technology, that's why prices follow the marginal cost of production. How many people pay for their calculator app anymore? What is the cost? What is the cost of a line of code? What is the cost of a line of code created by another line of code? You can see objectively that prices should be falling at that rate, but they're only falling at that rate if you're measuring in Bitcoin. Everything else is concentrating them up.
I think a lot of people agree with your philosophy and thesis. My question is, why is it that when I walk outside on the streets of where I'm currently located, downtown Vancouver, Canada, not all the merchants in the private sector accept or transact in Bitcoin? There must be a reason as to why the private sector hasn't fully adopted this yet.
So even this conversation we're having, you're finding how confusing this topic is for most people. If you're because they're used to measuring the system from the system. right? They're used to all of their prices being denominated in the currency that's being manipulated. And they've never had a way out of that system. They don't know. And so from that, if you've lived all your life in there and your parents lived your life and their grandparents and everything you've ever been taught in school is from that system, seeing a new system that seems complicated, that is actually relatively simple, you don't want to pay it attention. You don't want to look at the first principles because your belief structure is holding you back. And in countries like the US and Canada, where we have an advantage because of our money, and the disadvantage is in what was in El Salvador and Argentina and in African nations by the same thing that actually steals their productivity faster. Um, they're further away from the money monopoly than we are. So it makes natural sense on a technology that is evens a playing field for anybody in the world that you cannot change the rules of. The people furthest away from the money monopoly would go first, just like in any monopoly. It typically happens in a monopoly in business is the people furthest away, the most hurt by the monopoly, move first. And that's what you're seeing play out all over the world here. And everyone in Canada has an ability to, right? It's an open network, but I suspect that many in Canada will go slowly, but they're just hurting themselves by doing that.
When we do make this transition to digital cash, will it primarily be with Bitcoin or perhaps a stable coin or something else?
So I think you have to look at this in transitions, and even in what we're doing right now is we're talking about a light switch moment, and nothing happens like that. It's a transition. This transition is going to go on for a long time, and there's going to be a lot of head fakes, and there's going to be a lot of the government's going to try to stop it, and a different government is going to accept it. All of the things that are going to happen through this transition are still in front of us. We're very, very early. Like I said, we're 1996 in the internet, imposing this new discipline on the world. And so you can expect lots to happen throughout that change, including BlackRock coming on, including different ETFs trying to capture enough of this and then lend against it. And then that'll blow up. Just like anyone that's kind of short Bitcoin or lent against it creates counterparty risk for themselves on a technology that is different than our existing than our existing technology. So prices falling means debt prices rise. And so if you're lending a bit against Bitcoin and trying to optimize yield on an instrument that doesn't give you yield, then at some point in that cycle, you're going to be liquidated, just like FTX was, just like many others. And so all of these things, just because human beings and the rational being kind of fear and greed are still in front of us on this long transition to this. But here's what I'd say, David. It doesn't, if you denominate in Bitcoin, and I'm the caveat, if it stays decentralized and secure, which I think is inevitable, but you could do your own work on that. If you denominate in Bitcoin and it stays decentralized and secure, it actually doesn't matter what anybody else does. That productivity is flowing to you. It doesn't matter what happens. In other words, you're already living in the future, just like if you were early on the internet. But you could invest in the internet itself rather than on a company on top of the internet.
There does seem to be a problem on a nation state level. The US government has $33.7 trillion of debt. Ray Dalio has called this a long-term problem. Interest expenses on this debt has now surpassed $1 trillion a year. Jeff, the government, like you said earlier, needs inflation to erode the nominal value of some of this debt. Bitcoin actually could provide the antithesis of what they're trying to do, which is erode debt away through inflation. So I understand the argument of using Bitcoin to solve our long-term problems with our debt. It doesn't seem like the government is on board with that yet, right? Do you agree with that?
I 100% agree with that, because you'd have to ask, where does the government's power come from? And if the government can get bigger by stealing more of your money and make people feel like they can't have enough money, so they need more social problems, so the government gets bigger so they can steal more, you would see naturally a government would be very against a system like Bitcoin that redistributes the power to the people, of course. And any media or anything that's extremely large in that system that benefits from that unjust tax, that unfair theft, would be similar. What would a dishonest ledger say about an honest ledger? And so ultimately, when I did my work on this, I tried to disprove my hypothesis, and I tried to say, where could I kill Bitcoin and what would happen on all the game theory that would happen as a result of trying to kill it. And I came to a conclusion that there's a very, very, very small chance of killing Bitcoin. Governments will try. All of this noise that we hear will continue to be tried, but it'll only make it stronger, because it'll open the eyes to what you're talking about on your show right now, and more people, as a result of asking serious questions. Why should the government be able to take my money through inflation when I don't have a vote in inflation? Does that mean, do I live in a democracy anymore? At what rate of inflation, at what rate of theft do I still live in a democracy where I have my vote counts?
Okay, I'm going to close off on your book. The title of your book, The Price of Tomorrow: Why Deflation is the Key to an Abundant Future. You talked about how technological advances could contribute to this deflation, like you mentioned before. Let me just pose this question to you first. Some people, not all, but some economists believe that inflation and or deflation is tied to the money supply. Suppose we have deflation that could imply, according to monetarists, that could imply that the money supply is shrinking. Wouldn't that be bad for economic growth, Jeff?
No, because you have a technology that could have an unlimited velocity in money.
Okay.
So through the Lightning Network right now, I can send money. It could move around 40 times in the next 10 minutes all over the world and be back at me, unlimited. No friction to it whatsoever. And so now you have a base currency that can't be moved around, and you have a free market that's moving on top of it, and you literally have an unlimited velocity in that money. So no, that is a construct from an old way of thinking around gold, and then gold couldn't move fast enough, so we had to put debt on top of it. And once you have debt on top of it, then you must have inflation to be able to keep the debt solvent. And so that turns into short-term debt cycles, and then it turns into long-term debt cycles as certain actions are natural through an economy, and once they get too big, you can't reset it otherwise. In other words, through war or massive debasement of currencies.
And in your book, do you describe what kind of deflation is ideal for an economy? Presumably, we can't have deflation forever. There's a floor, right?
Let's pose that, because again, some of these ideas sound so contradictory to what we've been taught all of our lives. But in your life, the oxygen you're breathing right now is probably the most valuable thing in your life. Why is it free? So why shouldn't other things that are equally valuable let the free market forces to be free? So why today does an egg cost more than it did 50 years ago, when we've had technology in eggs too? Why do some of these why do some of the they're made to go up unnaturally? So you could have deflation forever in an economy if that's the free market. And to use yourself as an example, you use the things that give you more value. And that's what entrepreneurs create. They create something that, because if they created something that gave you less value, you wouldn't use it. So you, in your personal desire, probably the Zoom call too, why we're using it costs you less and it can touch more people, and it created an audience for you. And that took an audience from somebody else that is paying a higher cost. So you can see through your actions touching more people, and what you make decisions every day through your actions, you're trying to get more value. That's what the free market does. And yet we measure a system that does exactly the opposite. And we think it should work that way because we've been ingrained into the system. Prices could fall forever. In fact, the free market demands it. Prices fall forever. And energy prices do too. All prices do. Because we use technology to solve problems. And where would, and if you had a big fat monopoly on margins, and there are a whole bunch of people out of work or entrepreneurs that said, what do you think they would attack first?
How does the human element of greed factor into this new system you're talking about?
So,
Suppose I were a business owner and my product's deflating, but it's a popular product. Wouldn't I just raise the price?
and a competitor would beat you because the free market wins. That's
Okay.
why prices fall to the marginal cost of production. And Bitcoin is imposing that on the world.
But
Um,
if my product falls to the marginal cost of production in price, how do I make money as a business
so
owner?
what happens is your business goes out of business, just like Blockbuster went out of business, and
Right.
a new business takes its place, the free market. If you, unless you innovate faster to be able to deliver more value to your users, then you will be out of business. But the output of you being out of business is all prices fell faster for all of society. So that's kind of that's what the free market does. And it doesn't, ultimately it doesn't even matter what I'm saying here, because Bitcoin is imposing this discipline. But it looks very different, completely 180 different to the world that we have today, where we're led to believe that, or use the counter argument to what you just said, the only reason I can stay in business is because I have an unnatural monopoly because of printed money that I can raise prices.
So I think if I can summarize, and please correct me if I'm wrong, ultimately what you're saying is the adoption and usage of Bitcoin as money, as a store of value, will significantly improve our standard of living because deflation will occur. Is that
Globally.
correct?
Globally,
Well,
the productivity that is designed for us in the free market is forced to us from the free market instead of concentrated up in government and big tech and big monopolies.
and just to be clear, when you say deflation of the goods we consume, you don't also mean deflation of our real wages as well, because let's say I've earned less.
So
Yeah.
so there's a really good, I think that's a really good thing, because people mistake real and or real wages. So
Right.
your income could go down,
Yes.
but your real wages could go up because
Yes.
prices fell faster.
Correct.
So that would be hard to measure from the existing system. And if a politician said to you, listen, the free market is deflationary, we're going to allow prices to fall and your wages are going to fall, and don't worry, you're going to get paid more later, you're going to get your wages are going to fall less fast than prices, you'd never vote for that politician. So you can see through that example, even though we know the truth that technology is deflationary, that should be giving us abundance, we would vote for the opposite. That's why the system has to be outside of the system. That's why Bitcoin imposes that discipline and allows that to happen.
I spoke to Tim Draper, who was also a avid proponent of adopting Bitcoin, as you know, and he mentioned that at some point in the future, maybe when both of us are gone, at some point in the future, when all 21 million Bitcoins are mined, there would need to be some sort of asymptote on the growth of the value of Bitcoin. And he posited $10 million. I mean, it doesn't matter what the value is; it's some value. Do you agree that there is a limit to growth of
So
value?
I almost can't even imagine because when you're saying $10 million of value, again, you're
Right.
talking about a fiat instrument.
Sure.
So as Bitcoin ushers in energy abundance, and energy is a first principle to everything else that we consume, then you could see at some point Bitcoin in relative value could actually go down. But it would go up in real purchasing power because everything else would fall faster. So the construct of, and that's why this is such a hard construct to understand. We're used to measuring all prices through money that is increasingly abundant. And if you create abundance in money, creates scarcity everywhere. Scarcity in money creates abundance. So if you have more monetary units chasing more things, prices go up. If you have less monetary units, chasing the prices go down. So we're used to measuring in the money that's being manipulated, and we're used to measuring everything in that life. And this imposes such a change to that it's hard to comprehend.
Well, Jeff, this has been a very enlightening talk. I appreciate you challenging conventional monetary narratives and educating us. Where else can we learn about your work and more about your thoughts? I mentioned your book, The Price of Tomorrow. I'll put the link to Amazon.
Probably jeffbooth.ca, my website. I have a couple other articles that dig into this a little deeper if somebody wanted to look. Or if somebody's doing some work in the Bitcoin space and looking for capital, that's the Ego Death Capital.
I have one final question before we go. There are still some people, even in my personal lives, who don't know what Bitcoin is. In one sentence, someone asks you, Jeff, what is Bitcoin? What is it? How would you explain this to somebody who really wants just a simple explanation? Yes.
An open, decentralized, and secure monetary network that will become the peer-to-peer internet.
Excellent. I noticed you didn't use the word money in there. Is that on purpose?
It was on purpose.
Okay, great. Well, I encourage everyone to follow Jeff in the links down below and learn more about his thoughts. Excellent thoughts. Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
And thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.